And a very good morning to you. Thank you for coming to this first presentation of the second day of Civil Service Live. My name is Andrew Jackson. I work for a company called Kenexa, which hopefully some of you will know, which is now, as of December last year, acquired by IBM. My job, I'm responsible for Kenexa's government business. Before I joined the company, I was a public servant for 30-odd years until the ageist organisation that is the British Army, for no other reason than I'd come to a particular birthday, cast me out onto the streets, which is where Rudy Karsan, who's going to speak to you this morning, found me. And what I now spend a lot of time doing and am very enthusiastic about is bringing the capabilities and good practice that exist in the commercial sector to help bear on some of the issues that you and your departments face. Rudy started Kenexa, has seen it grow over the years, and as I say, sold that company to IBM last year. So we're going through an integration process with a company whose mission is all about making the world a smarter place. And of course, they have realized that unless the people who manage all those systems can be smarter as well, then you're not optimizing the systems that they spend so much time developing. So Kenexa is a people-focused company, and what we do is help optimize the most important asset of any organization, which is its people. Rudy spends a lot of time going around talking to business leaders and chief human resource officers for a whole variety of organizations, commercial and government. He's based in the States and has come over for the conference. So without further ado, I'll get out of the way and introduce Rudy Karsan. Good morning, Rudy.
Thanks, Andrew. Good morning, everyone. I can assure you I didn't find General Jackson as a homeless person wandering the streets, as he implied, being cast aside. When we come to conferences normally, especially if it's the first meeting of the day, a lot of people plan on taking a nap before they really get into the conference spirit. But unfortunately, I'm going to ask you to work. If we think about human society and humanity over the last 50 years, I would argue that we are at the golden age of humanity. Any metric that you can think of has improved at an accelerating rate, and all the bad metrics have reduced at an accelerating rate. So I'm going to present 5 scenarios if you accept the hypothesis that we are in the golden age of humanity. And the first one is that we are getting ready to enter into Armageddon. Life is going to become absolutely horrible. The second scenario is that we will stumble along and remember the good old days. The third scenario is we are in this massive apocalypse cycle and we're just starting the journey. The fourth one is we're going to continue this journey at an accelerated rate. And the fifth one is we're getting ready to enter utopia. How many of you believe in scenario number 1? Raise your hands. Don't be cowards. Scenario 2? Scenario 3? 4? 5? This is an optimistic crowd. A lot of people believe that we are entering into this phase that is going to be very negative if you listen to the general media and if you listen to your friends. As we think about the world today, I'm going to present a case to you where I believe that we're reaching a point where we're going to be bifurcated. We've got an 80% chance of scenario number 5 and a 20% chance of scenario 1. So let's just kind of take stock where we're at today. Technology improvements are increasing at such a dramatic pace that we don't even stop and think about it. Mobile devices, smartphones, half the world's population today owns one. This isn't a toy of the rich anymore. We think about all the change. I mean, when you think about photography, we can actually see around the corner. through light dissipating in a manner that we can collect the information and literally see around the corner. If you think about income, our global GDP has been increasing at an accelerated rate over the last 50 years, and every decade has accelerated faster, including the last one, which had the Great Recession. Poverty, more people have been taken out of poverty in the last 50 years, according to the United Nations, than the preceding 500 years combined. If you stop and wonder about things of that sort, you say, wow, I mean, we are really at a terrific place in time. Our education system is much maligned right now. But if you look at the data, you will see that the amount of education past the age of 15 has almost doubled globally. This isn't Western data, this is global data, and projected to increase even faster. So we will be in school presumably till the age of 25 in the coming years. So we are educating ourselves at an accelerated rate, and if I look at the US data, the rate of high school dropouts in the last 50 years has reduced by 50%. Debts due to hostilities in the last 50 years has reduced by 75% and by 50% in the last 20 years. By 99% since the decade of the Second World War. We are living in the most peaceful times of humanity. If you look at age, we're now approaching a life expectancy of 80 in the Western world. We're leading a life where our lifespans increase by 0.3 years for every year that elapses. I'll repeat that number. Every year that elapses, our lifespans are going by a third of a year. If you look at our health, both access as well as our health itself, we are leading healthier lives today than the King of England did 100 years ago. And this I'm talking about is the general population. The youth is just absolutely phenomenal. Our youth of today are amazing. They're what I call in practice the cosmopolitan ethic. They don't care about your gender, your sexual preference, your race, your creed. All they care about is who you are. And they intermingle in ways that we would find fascinating. In 2010, in the US, 1 in 6 marriages were between youth of visible minorities. So I'm not talking French and German, I'm talking brown and black, white and yellow and the like. Speaking from a personal example, my daughter of Indian origin I was born in Kenya, she was born in Canada, grew up in the States, was in investment banking, went to Argentina to open up a restaurant. She failed miserably, lost all her money, came back home with a husband who was Argentine, of Croatian background, did not speak English, no habla español, made for interesting family dynamics. But that's the world that the youth has created for us. And 1 billion of us, 1 billion people in 2010 crossed an international boundary. How are we going to go to war with one another? It's going to be very difficult. And if you look at rights, human rights have accelerated at such a rate that I'll say something controversial that my younger daughter doesn't agree with me either. But I think women's rights are now battles on the margin. The CEO of my company is a woman, and I'm willing to bet you that if you look at the 500 largest companies' appointments, 5 years from now, half of them will be women. There are parliaments around the world where the majority of the legislators are now women. So while there does exist around the world rights issues, we are accelerating past so many of these issues that we haven't even stopped and really admired ourselves and said, as a species, We should be in awe of what we've accomplished. You must have heard of 3D printing, which is the ability to manufacture something at home. However, we now have 4D printing. So if I take this glass with advanced materials, it is so smart that if cold water is in there, the insulation will work in a particular way to give me feeling of room temperature when I pick it up. But if it's a hot liquid, it will reverse the process. And those are advanced materials that currently exist. These things will not be manufactured or purchased from a store. Today, you can buy for $650 your own 3D printer to put into your own home. MakerBot sells it. It's down on High Street. If you look at this picture over here, this is a jawbone that was implanted in a lady that was 83 years old, suffering from oral cancer, that gave her full mobility of her jaw once again. It was 3D printed using titanium. Total cost was $86 US. The same item, if you go through traditional manufacturing processes and buy from medical device companies, would cost you $16,000. We all complain about food and water. They are going to be the evils of tomorrow. Nanotechnology membranes exist today using tidal power and 95% less energy to make seawater potable, just using tidal power. So if you're anywhere close to the ocean, it's not the oil of tomorrow. We're doing it today as we speak. Vertical farming, which was supposed to arrive about 10, 15 years from now, which uses 90% less land and 90% less pesticides. If you go into a little town in Germany called Munich, which you probably have heard of, 20% of their food is now grown on vertical farmings, on the buildings there, supplying the local population. So this isn't science fiction that we're talking about. 3D manufacturing has advanced to such a point that the European Space Agency is now conducting tests to use regolith or moon dust to actually 3D print housing on the moon so we don't have to take supplies with us. This isn't science fiction. This is actual technology advancements that are taking place today. The environment's going to basically kill us all. Well, right now exists a biosynthetic form, and it's questionable whether it's life or not. So there's a lot of bioethical issues around this. But Craig Venter, who decoded the human gene prior to the US government, has found an organism that can take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere while simultaneously giving us energy. There are other technologies out there that are available that are making carbon dioxide into solid blocks that we then implant back into the earth as we remove some of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So there are changes that are taking place that are so true. The UK has smart grid systems that have brought down energy consumption by about 8% in places where it's been established. And we're moving at that at an accelerated rate. So what's the problem we have? If we think about the problems that we have, we say, okay, how are we going to continue to communicate with each other? Where is going to be some of this stuff? And today exists technology where you can actually plant a cell phone into your jawbone, have a jawbone phone, an RFID tag that slides into your skin, and you can walk around without the device. And before you say, I'm not going to ingest a foreign substance to give me superhuman capacity or convenience, let me ask you a basic question. What's the #1 drug that was accepted by human society and fastest selling drugs since introduction? I want to guess at that? Viagra, giving men superhuman performance. And so we can say what we want to, our actions are a lot different. So what's the problem? What's going to stop this world of abundance? I would argue that what's going to stop this world of abundance is going to be meaningful work. lack of meaningful work is going to create a divide in society that is going to be extremely difficult to overcome. Let me share a personal example with you. I founded Kenexa 25 years ago. As an entrepreneur, one of the things you always want to do is sell a company for a lot of money. Took the company public, sold it to IBM, one of the 3 largest tech transactions last year globally. One of the 3 largest companies that IBM had purchased. It should have been a day of great celebration. December rolls around, the deal closes, the check does hit the bank, and the cash does clear. And all I have are feelings of fear and sadness. That's my emotional makeup. And at first I thought, I'm abandoning the employees, I'm abandoning our customers, and that's why I feel the way I do. A month elapsed and I still felt the same way. And then I realized I hadn't changed. It was all about me. I'm as greedy and selfish as I've always been. I didn't have any more meaning in my life. I had invested 25 years in building this company and lost all sense of purpose. There was no guiding beacon. And I always said my family and friends and faith were the most important things for me. When I look back, I spent 2 to 3 more amount of time, 2 to 3 times as much time on the business and on my work than I did with my wife, who she and I met at age 17, and we're the best of friends. I'd spent more intellectual and emotional energy on the business in my work than I had spent with them. And as we think about our own careers, and we realize the importance of work, there is this yearning to be significant. So let's just kind of trace back how we as a society, as human beings, have evolved to this point. At the Big Bang of culture about 40,000 years ago, the Neanderthals died and we lived. But they were more robust, they had larger brain cavities, they were stronger. We discovered this notion of being social. We understood that communication and sharing of knowledge evolved us as a species while they didn't. And all our decisions from then on changed from survival of food and finding food, and this notion of tribe or family was then introduced. 10,000, and we lived this way for millennia. 10,000 years ago, this notion of faith entered into society. And all the major decisions we made, our partners, where we lived, everything depended on food, family, and faith. In comes the Industrial Revolution. And the number of job families explodes from about 20 to 2,000 as we are today. And all of a sudden, the number one dimension of decision-making becomes work. Look at your partners today. It's no longer the same faith. You don't necessarily eat the same food, but you might be working at the same place or went to the same college or university. And so we changed as a species. And if we don't evolve in this area, it's going to create a tremendous level of stress in society. And so when we start looking at our work and career, if we do not give our children the same opportunities that we went through, because work became from how we survived to what we did, including taking up of our last names around the world. This wasn't an English tradition or a British tradition. It was true in India. It was true in China. Our last names became our work. To today, where it defines who we are as individuals, there is a yearning for greatness in each one of us. That we need to be able to project and be able to express ourselves in. Life will change fairly dramatically. And if you look at the youth of today, where the massive amount of unemployment is taking place, if we don't correct that situation, we're in for scenario number one. And the youth of today really have what I call the 3 E's. They're working from 2 areas of massive disadvantage. I'm sorry, 3 areas of massive disadvantage. The first one is education. There has been a tremendous amount written and talked about. But at its bare essence, our educational systems of today were designed at the advent of the industrial age, where efficiency and productivity ruled. So we took raw materials, put them through an assembly line, and manufactured an output. We decided to do the same with our children, with the only dimension of determining that spot on the conveyor belt being their chronological age. And we stuck with methods of teaching which have proven not to work, which is we insist on reading and listening while learning takes place while speaking and doing. The data that I presented in the earlier part of the presentation, we all knew that information. It existed. I just put it together so I know it a little better. I learned it because I had to deliver it. That's how real learning takes place. And so that deprivation we are creating for our children is something that we have recognized. And there are new models that are coming out, everything from the independent schools around the world to the Khan Academy using the internet. And I'm highly confident that we will innovate ourselves out of this. But it is a major, major, major blockage to this creation of jobs that we really need to address. The second area that I want to point out is this sense of entitlement that we as a species, and this began about 70 years ago, and the primary 2 countries on this were England and the US. The England had the Beveridge Report that basically said we have to remove the evils of poverty to the beginnings of a welfare state. And in the US, Roosevelt declared Social Security. And Social Security was declared at a time that you got what was today $640 a month at age 65, when the life expectancy was 67. So it was truly for the old and the decrepit. In the UK, it was no different. But it's as Tocqueville wrote in his book, Democracy in America. Democracy will work until the population realizes it can feed in the public at the public trough. And what we have done is elected officials, it didn't matter what party you were from, who continued to give us more benefits to the point where Social Security in the US is now used by middle-class Americans to purchase a second home in Florida. But this sense of entitlement has had an unintended consequence to our children, because we now have said to them, you are now entitled to work if you have a college education. Never before in the history of humanity have we as individuals been voluntarily giving away our own responsibility for our own health and our own livelihoods to another group, namely our government. This has been just a societal experiment that we've carried out for the last 70 years. But that sense of entitlement now that exists in our children says you are now entitled to a job rather than you have to create something, and we have to figure out a way around it. And the third is, if you look at the data and you look at Nobel Prize winners, other than prize winners for peace, in any of the sciences, greater than 80% of those ideas emerged in their 20s. If you look at the global Fortune 500 companies, they were founded by individuals in their 20s, over 85% of them. I founded Kenexa in my 20s. How do we fuel this energy? And how do we bring back that dignity of work? Because when we have done, what we have done in society is elevated certain job families to a level that we treat them as demigods, whether it's entertainment or the like. But when you stop and you think about it for yourself, what's the number one reason that I lead as healthy a life today? It's the loss of communicable diseases. It also forms the number 2 reason why my life expectancy is so long. And the last mile of reducing the communicable diseases is the mighty trash collector. And so when I talk to them, as I walk up to them and shake their hands and say, thank you for the healthy and long life you've given me, I happened to ask one of them one day and said, why is it all you guys are so young? And he said to me, sir, this job breaks my back. We can't do it for too long. They're giving up their health for my health. And we as a society have to learn to figure out a way to bring back dignity into the professions and into the job families that mean so much to us. So on that note, I'll open up for questions.
So we've got about 10 or 15 minutes for questions. Would anyone like to kick off the discussion? Yes, sir.
You mentioned that you believe we should try and bring back dignity to the job families and the hospitals. How do you think that could be achieved?
I think what we really need to do is we need to, as a society, change our preferences. Because what we have done today is we're saying that we are willing to watch the commercials so that we buy the goods that allow the entertainers of today to attain their status. The entertainers of today were the bards of old. And we have allowed an economic system, and this is not anyone's fault. It's the way we chose to make decisions. We as individuals we made a choice that said, I'm willing to pay a football player this much money because I'm willing to pay for the ticket and I'm willing to watch it on TV so that the TV station can make all that money and in turn the football player can make all that money. And so what we really need to do is, as a society, as we're changing, if each one of us can individually make decisions based on what things really mean to us, rather than what we're told. And that fundamentally relies the decision point. Now, can we bring about legislation or policy and stuff like that? I don't think that's going to work. I think it's a question of educating and having people understand. Like, let me give you a specific example. How many of you read newspapers? Raise your hands. So it's everyone in this room. Right? Wrong. I haven't read a newspaper in 15 years. How many of you watch TV at least once a week? Raise your hands. Everyone in this room, right? Wrong, except me. I haven't watched TV in about 20 years. Not even a sporting event. So if you think about newspapers, for example, if you think about the basic purpose of a newspaper, what is it? It's to make money for the business owner. And so everything that you put in there is to get the eyeballs there, and it goes under the guise of giving you information. Try not reading a newspaper for 6. I've run public companies. I've started 15 businesses, and I haven't read a newspaper in 15 years. Not one, ever. I actually don't pick it up. Because I realize that the information presented there follows the old axiom on Fleet Street, which is if it bleeds, it reads. So there is a deliberate focus to bring about maximum exposure to create maximum emotion. And it's a lot easier to create anger and sadness than to create happiness. And so fundamentally, we as a species need to say, what is it that we're really doing to ourselves? Because we really live in just absolutely awesome times. We're leading lives today that are unthinkable to our forefathers. I mean, look at me. I'm a little Indian kid that grew up in Kenya on the back streets of Mombasa, and I'm standing on a stage in the greatest city in the world. Wouldn't have happened a generation ago. Just wouldn't have. The ability to travel, communicate, articulate. My grandmother left India when she was 14 and she got married. She never saw her sister and she died at age 96. She never saw a sister again. It would be unthinkable today. That's not that long ago I knew my grandmother. So I think there is just a fundamental change and fundamental shift in the way we as individuals, like we never, ever, ever, when's the last time you said to yourself, boy, I'm really happy today because the world's such a wonderful place. The world is really a terrifically wonderful place. But no, we pick up that first newspaper of the day that tells us 14 people were killed in Chile. Oh my God, how sad is that? So if we can't change, then I think we'll just keep barreling down this. But we introduce that education, we get our youth in. I think we can just continue to really, really, really appreciate what we've built for ourselves. We're just doing amazingly well.
And that whole concept of dignity and work and serving humanity is why a lot of people stayed in Rudy's company and why many of us joined it in the first place. So it can apply, I recognize it. Different workspaces, different challenges, but the concept works. Yes, sir.
Significant body of opinion that would say that exactly the kind of technological changes that you identified earlier on in the presentation are precisely the reasons why there won't be full employment in the decades to come, and that actually what we do need to prepare for is a post-employment society, where a small proportion of the population work, and that the optimistic outlook is we have enough resources again from the technology to make sure that people don't have to work and can, but the other half of the point would be they do need benefits, they do need supporting, they do need they may be well be able to do research or enrich their intellectual lives, but they won't necessarily have jobs as we understand them today. Thoughts on that?
And that's why I talk about the notion of meaningful work rather than jobs. Jobs, do you know jobs is just a word that emerged in the English language in the 16th century? It didn't even exist in our vocabulary. So this notion of meaningful work is not necessarily restricted to a job. How many of you earn income from another source than your primary job today? Raise your hands. Look around the room. About half the room raised their hands. There's a source of income that we all partake in that we don't even realize we're doing it. We have evolved to that point. Now to take that, what you just said, and expand it to society as large, there's a wide spectrum, an extremely wide spectrum of opinion that we are going to be working at full employment to the way we're going to change so that the people in jobs who are working 60, 70 hours a week will now start to condense their time or reduce their time and spend their time on other activities. I fundamentally believe that we have within us a yearning for greatness. Each one of us was born on this planet with a purpose. And that purpose might be to serve our children. It might be to serve our neighborhood. Whatever that might be. And as long as we keep that alive, work will continue. But if we deprive ourselves of that, then we will get into this Armageddon where the people, the haves, will insist on keeping everything until they realize they can't buy enough security to protect themselves from the have-nots, because their guards will be part of the have-nots and turn on them, which is happening in places like Kenya, the country I was born in.
Yes, sir.
I wasn't quite sure what your issue was with education. My issue with education today is my daughter's 13 years old. She's doing a Spanish exam, GCSE. And I asked her what she wants to do with the Spanish exam. No, it doesn't matter. It's in 2 years' time I'll be doing a French exam. It seems to me that education today is founded on as many exam results you can get, not which is the child to be a better person. And I'm terribly worried that she's going to leave school with lots of exams that the person I don't recognise. And I'm really concerned about education. I'd like to know what your view of education is.
So, as I mentioned, it was designed at a time to put us through conveyor belts. And then what we did is it became easy on us, right? We turned around and we said, we're going to delegate this responsibility of education to the educational system. not to me as the parent. And so we accelerated that. Our children no longer learned on our knees and on our laps. We were supposed to just simply provide for them. And so if you have children today, the educational system is such that there are 3 or 4 things fundamentally different than from the way we lead lives. We only, as a child, really socially interact with people our own age, while in the working world we interact with all ages. Make sure your children have friends that are 2-3 years older and 2-3 years younger, so they learn how to become a leader and a follower. Make sure that when your children are going through this wide cornucopia of information, that they learn to digest it and pick up the mega skills. The mega skills that I talk about is flexibility. Today's world, the half-life of knowledge is 4 years. The student entering into the first year of university, by the time they graduate, will have learned 50% of data that is then obsolete. That's the half-life of education. So we have to teach our children the ability to learn. We know how to do that, but we lose it along the way. And this regurgitation of data, as you pointed out, which is just taking the information and then push it back out again, measuring your capacity to remember, is something that is going to become obsolete, I believe. Because we'll have access to that information right in our heads. Google Glasses today provides it for us. So by the time my children get there, the idea of examinations will have disappeared. The whole notion of regurgitation to test your memory capacity will disappear. You see, because you don't know today if I have an RFID tag under my skin, if I'm getting the data through some sort of a lens in my eye. As I am talking, I might be reading. You won't even know that. And that's what's going to happen. And so, if I look at education, the parties in education are so ensconced in their views and opinions. It's so easy to blame the unions. It's so easy to blame the government. It's so difficult to look at ourselves and say, how did I contribute to this? What have I done for my child? And if we accept that responsibility to educate our own children, the world will change very quickly. So I think this notion of self-awareness and responsibility to our children that's imbued in us as individuals, because we created or were participating in creating of that life, will then, I believe, change the outlook. The systems itself will take time. Just like systems of old. It'll take a decade or a millennia or a century for it to get then established within society. I thought I saw a hand up there, and then I'll go there. Yeah, yes ma'am.
You talked about your belief that everybody has a purpose.
Yes.
I'd be interested to know a bit more about how you found yours, and also do you have any advice for those of us in the civil service who perhaps might soon be having to find ourselves a new one as a result of public sector cuts and possible redundancies?
So, Kenexa was founded on 2 words, serving humanity, and what I fundamentally believed. And so I grew up in a world of service. And so I fundamentally believe that if you're an engaged employee, you're a better parent, a better spouse, a better community member, and that's the way we would contribute to society. Now, there is another part to me. I mean, I'm a public company CEO. I do care about growth and profits. That's why we sold to IBM what we did, and that's why we built what we did. So it's not a question of you can't have both. You got to figure out the power of and how I went about doing it was a structured exercise, including using my board of directors. And I wrote a book called We, W-E, which became a New York Times bestseller. And I really pushed on 3 points. You really got to understand what your purpose is, and there is a whole series of things you can do. Understand, so that defines who you are. understand what your passions are. And then make sure you get paid enough, that you're an economic engine that can support yourself. Because that gives you the sense of dignity, that you're a contributing member of society. The how is a journey. It's not a silver bullet. It's a journey of learning and discovery. And the two things I would suggest, number one, there are people that you know that love you and care for you. Go to them for help. They'll help you think it through. Because as you talk about things, you learn about things. Don't be ashamed because I'm going to lose my job. It's a societal, it's an environmental issue. It's not a competence issue. And the more you talk about that, the less shame you feel, the less fear you feel. Go to people and talk about it, for God's sakes. It's not therapy. It's really discussing what makes you great. And the second is collect as much information as you can. Instead of reading the newspapers, learn about the 2,000 job families that exist. There is a cornucopia of data out there available. If you choose to put yourself through it, if you spend 8 hours just on the internet looking for ways to identify what my strengths and skills are, you'll find there'll be such a wide array of choice that you'll get confused in what to pick. But invest that time.
We better make this the last one, Rudy.
Okay. Go ahead. I wasn't watching everyone that raised their hand.
You mentioned that you felt quite a sense of sadness when you sold the company, and also
Deep sadness.
deep
Yeah.
sadness, and the sense of slight regret that I picked up. You hadn't spent enough time with your family during the last 25 years. You didn't really expand on what you think you might have wanted to have done differently. I was wondering if you could
No, so what I realized that my words and my actions were not in sync. I said that my family and friends was most important, but I spent most of my time around my work and and then when I reflected on it some more, I realized it's just the way I'm built. Because if I decide to regret about something in the past that I can't change, I don't have a chance of do-over. So what I want to do is I want to embrace my own humanity. And in the process of embracing my own humanity, I realized the way that I'm built, the way that my ego carries me. So a lot of time, a good friend of mine describes me this way. He said, you've got a massive ego encased in a veneer of humility, which I thought was the perfect insult, but also a very truthful statement. And so if I look back, I'm not going to foist myself on a relationship with my family. I would let that develop naturally. But what I would do is I would probably spend more time that gives me joy and exhilaration in a sense of individual humanness and less time on pleasing others if I had to choose. I would choose more time in serving others than feeding myself on my addictions. So that's where I would make different choices. So on that note, I'll finish with a story. Today we sit in a world that creates so much anxiety because of the waves of change that are hitting us, that there is a tremendous sense of just an absolute lack of control. And this feeling like we're hurtling through life without a sense of any direction. And these changes are also creating a tremendous amount of fear and anger in us. And that reminds me of a time when I was growing up in Mombasa, Kenya, as I said. I used to swim competitively then. And I know this physique doesn't lend to that fact, but I really did. But the thing in Mombasa was that we only had 2 swimming pools. And so I had to learn to practice in the ocean. And I hated the waves because they would knock me off course, they would tire me out, force me to drink brine or seawater, and you just feel sick from that. And so for every power vested in me as a 12 and 13-year-old, I commanded the waves to stop. And they wouldn't listen to me. I negotiated with God, refused to talk to me. I prayed to him, didn't listen to me. Until one day I realized, accidentally, that I could ride those waves. And when I realized I could ride those waves, they gave me such a feeling of joy and exhilaration. I felt one with nature. I felt weightless. I felt nothing was beyond my grasp. And the waves would still knock me off course, still tire me out, still make me sick because it forced me to drink water. But I welcomed them. And so as we look to the future with the waves of change that are hitting us, my thoughts and prayers are you have as much joy and exhilaration from riding them as I did the waves in Mombasa, Kenya. Thank you and God bless.